final lecture in the series. Okay, here we go. Okay, now, transitioning from republic into empire, you have to understand that obviously as the generals gain more power and authority, as Rome became more militaristic, generals are going to gain more popularity. And if you have the will of the military, if you have control of the military, that gives you a lot of power. Okay, and although Gladiator is not a factual movie, although they kind of pull some names and some scenarios that actually did happen, there are some things within Gladiator that actually do become reality, and that is, if you have the loyalty of the army, you can be quite political. Okay, and then later on, even Maximus says, you know, let my men see me alive, and you'll see where their loyalties lie. And so, if you are a general in command of legions, you have the ability and the power to influence society. Okay, and that's ultimately what had happened in Rome in its transition from republic to empire. And you know, we talk about the first triumvirate. You know, these were all generals: Julius Caesar and Pompey, Crassus. These were all generals. Okay, they had fought a war against each other. Okay, and so that's essentially how the transition from republic to empire happens from a political standpoint. Now, from a historical and factual standpoint here, what we're looking at is within Rome, Julius Caesar had crossed the Rubicon River. It's kind of like this point of no return, like a Phantom of the Opera sort of thing. Okay, but crossed the Rubicon River with his troops, thus declaring war on Rome itself. And so that causes this civil war to break out. Ultimately, Julius Caesar is going to be victorious, but the Senate remains intact. It's not completely gutted and thrown away. Okay, and so we don't necessarily refer to as Julius Caesar as the first emperor of Rome. Okay, but the Senate did fear his acquisition of power, or his desire to possibly acquire more power, or their perceived desire that he wanted to gain more power. And so they conspired to ultimately kill him, which then sprang a second civil war. So enter the second triumvirate. This is Mark Antony and I'll talk about Cleopatra later. Mark Antony and Octavian, and Lepidus as well, but mainly it's Mark Antony and Octavian Caesar. And so the forces of Octavian and the forces of Mark Antony are going to continue to fight against each other in the Civil War, in the Second Civil War. And ultimately, Mark Antony is going to ally himself with Cleopatra of Egypt, which is nothing more than a second-rate power at this point. It's essentially a Roman province that still maintains some of its Egyptian roots. So it's not really much of an ally from that sense. But regardless, at the Battle of Actium, Mark Antony is going to be defeated by Octavian, and Octavian is then going to become the first Caesar of Rome. Okay? And then from that point, Caesar is going to be the term for the leader. So Octavian is going to change his name to Augustus, so Augustus Caesar, and from that point forward, Rome essentially becomes an empire, headed by an emperor, a dictatorship, if you will, even though there's still a Senate that exists, still a General Assembly, but the power they have is debatable. The amount of say they have in society is debatable. Okay? So that's essentially what happens, but Rome continues its expansionary policies, and eventually Rome is going to become too large to be ruled by one central location. And so the empire is actually going to be divided into two and have two locations and two capitals. So Rome, in the city of Rome, in the Western Empire, and then the Eastern Empire, centered at Constantinople. Emperor Diocletian is going to have this decree that Rome is going to divide it into two, actually divide it into four, but for our purposes, let's call it two. Okay, and so the Western Empire is going to be centered in Rome, the Eastern Empire at Constantinople. Okay, and then following this division, most of the stability and the culture and the learning of Roman society is going to shift to the east, to Constantinople. It's going to remain stable, while the West is going to head into what historians often call a decline, or a period of decline. Okay, and so what's happening in the West is you have Roman citizens more focused on their own well-being than on the glory that is Rome, or whatever you want to call it. You have that. There's the possible issues of tainted water with lead pipes causing problems with people's minds. There's also the problem of the issue of invasion. So internal turmoil and invasion help to bring about a decline in the West and a destruction of Rome. And 476 A.D. ultimately the Western Empire will fall. So that's kind of the date that's given to the Roman Empire falling. But it's really only the Western Empire. The Eastern Empire will remain well into the 1400s. Okay, at Constantinople, although it's no longer going to be called the Roman Empire, but change its name rather to the Byzantine Empire. Okay, so those are the basics of what we're looking at there. If you have any questions, make sure you post those to me, and I'll get back to you as soon as